first time the old man left a $100 bill folded under his coffee cup, I ran out into the parking lot after him because I was sure he'd made a mistake. It was a Sunday in October, the kind of gray morning where the whole town of Marlow seemed to be sleeping in, and I caught up to him by the gas pumps with the bill flapping in my hand like I'd stolen it. He was unlocking the door of a brown station wagon that had to be older than I was, and he turned around slow, the way older folks do, like the world owes them the extra second. "Sir," I said out of breath, "you left this. I think you meant to leave a 5. He looked at the 100. Then he looked at me. He had these pale blue eyes, faded almost to the color of the sky behind him, and a face full of the kind of lines you only get from a long life of weather and worry. "No," he said, "I meant the 100. That's way too much. The coffee and the pie come to $6. "I know what it comes to," he said. "I've been ordering the same thing for 9 years. And then he got into that big brown car and drove away, and I stood there in the cold holding more money than I made in a full shift, feeling like I'd missed something I was supposed to understand. I should tell you where I was back then because it matters to the rest of this. I was 29. I had a 6-year-old daughter named Posy and a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on Cedar Street, and I waited tables at a diner called the Bluebird 6 days a week. My husband had left 2 years before, somewhere between Posy's 4th birthday and her 5th, and the leaving had been so gradual that I almost couldn't tell you the day it happened. One season he was sleeping on the couch, the next he was sleeping at his brother's, and then there was a manila envelope and a court date, and his name was just gone off everything. Money was the constant ache. Not the dramatic kind, where you lose your house in a single terrible week. The slow kind. The kind where you stand in the cereal aisle doing math, where you tell your kid the dentist appointment is next month, 4 months in a row, where the check engine light comes on and you just decide not to see it. Rent was $850. My take home with tips ran about $1,400 a month if the weather was good and people felt generous. You can do that math as well as I could. So that $100 bill, when I finally tucked it into my apron pocket, did not feel like a windfall. It felt like a problem. It felt like the kind of money that comes with strings, and I'd had enough of strings. I told Gail about it when I got back inside. Gail owned the Bluebird, had owned it for 30 years, and she ran the place like a woman who'd seen every kind of trouble walk through her door and survived all of it. She was at the register with her reading glasses down on her nose. "That's Frank Calloway," she said, not even looking up. "He's been coming in since before you were born, practically. Wife used to come with him. Ruth. They'd sit in that back booth every Sunday after church." "Used to?" She passed. 3-4 years now. Gail finally looked at me over the glasses. "He kept coming. Orders 2 coffees and 2 slices of pie. Always pie, sits in the same booth." 2 coffees? 1 for him. 1 for her. She said it flat, like she was reading me the soup of the day, but something moved behind her eyes. "Leave him be on it. He's a good tipper and he doesn't bother anybody." 2 coffees. I'd been the one serving him for a month and a half by then, and I never thought about it. I just brought him his 2 cups and his 2 slices of apple pie, and I'd watched him drink 1 coffee and eat 1 slice, and I never once asked who the other one was for. I'd assumed he was waiting on somebody. I never imagined he was sitting there every Sunday with a ghost. I want to tell you I had some great epiphany right then. I didn't. I had a kid to feed and a shift to finish. But after that, I paid attention. He came every Sunday at 9:15, right after the early service let out. Brown wagon, gray overcoat, even when it wasn't cold enough for it, a paperback in his coat pocket that he never seemed to read. He'd sit in the back booth and I'd bring 2 coffees without him asking, and I started doing this thing where I'd set the second cup down across from him, in front of the empty seat, the way I figured Ruth used to take it. Cream, no sugar. I'd watched which way he stirred and guessed. The first time I set it down right, he went very still. Then he said she liked it just like that. "I figured," I said, and I didn't make a thing of it, and neither did he. But after that, the $100 bill came every single Sunday, folded the same way under the same cup, and I stopped trying to give it back. I'm not proud of taking it. I want to be honest with you about that. For a long time, I told myself I'd keep it set aside, that I'd return it all someday when I could afford to. I even put the first few hundreds in a coffee can in the cabinet above the fridge. But then Posy needed shoes, and then the electric bill came in red, and then the car. Well, The car is its own story. The transmission went in February. It went on a Tuesday morning with Posey in the back seat and the temperature at 9 degrees, the kind of cold that gets into your teeth. The car just sort of stopped responding, the engine revving while we sat there going nowhere on the shoulder of Route 9, the heater the only thing still working. I called Gail. I called the school. I sat with my daughter and we played I Spy with the frost on the windows so she wouldn't be scared. And I felt that specific kind of panic that has a price tag attached to it. Because I knew. I already knew before the tow truck driver even said the word transmission, that this was a number I could not pay. It was $2,200. I want you to sit with that number the way I had to. $2,200 when my savings, my entire savings, the coffee can and the bank combined, came to $411. Without a car, I couldn't get to work. Without work, I couldn't pay rent. The whole fragile thing I'd built came down to one part in one old Honda, and I remember standing in the cold garage of Dale's Auto with the fluorescent lights buzzing and the mechanic looking at me with sympathy that didn't help, and thinking, this is it. This is the thing that finally takes us under. I didn't cry in front of the mechanic. I waited until I'd dropped Posey at my neighbor's and I was walking the 2 miles home in the dark, and then I cried the whole way, ugly and gasping because there was nobody to see. That Sunday I almost didn't go into work. I was borrowing rides, calling in favors I didn't have, and the shame of it had me hollowed out. But Gail needed me and I needed the tips, so I caught a ride with Dottie, who worked the breakfast shift, and I tied on my apron and tried to be a person. Mr. Calloway came at 9:15 like always. I brought his 2 coffees. I set Ruth's down across from him, cream no sugar, and I must have looked as bad as I felt, because he set down his paperback that he never read, and looked at me with those faded blue eyes and said, "You're not all right today." It wasn't a question, so I didn't lie. I'm not even sure why I told him. Maybe because he was a stranger really, for all our Sundays. Maybe because he was the only person who'd asked. But I sat down across from him in Ruth's seat, in front of Ruth's coffee, and I told him about the transmission and the $2,200 and the 2 miles home in the dark. I told him I didn't know what I was going to do. I told him I was scared, and I never said that out loud to anybody, not even to myself. He listened the whole time. He didn't try to fix it while I was still talking, which I've since learned is the rarest thing a person can do. He just let me get to the end. Then he said, "How old's your girl?" 6, I said. "Posey, she's 6. He nodded slow. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the saucer, this little habit he had. "Ruth and I never had children," he said. "We wanted them. It didn't happen. We had each other a long time, and that was a whole life. A good one. But I'll tell you the thing nobody says about loving somebody for 51 years. He looked up. When they're gone, all that love doesn't go anywhere. It just sits in you with no place to put it down. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. "I leave the 100, he said, "because I had a notion you needed it more than I did, and because Ruth would have. She was the kind who couldn't watch somebody drowning and keep her hands in her pockets." He almost smiled. "Drove me half crazy, the things that woman gave away." I started to tell him I couldn't take anything else, that he'd already done too much, but he held up one hand, gentle. "Come by the house tomorrow," he said, and he wrote an address on the back of his paper placemat. "I've got something for that car." I almost didn't go, I want you to know that. I lay awake that whole night talking myself out of it because everything in me had been trained by then to expect the catch, the cost, the disappointment waiting at the end of any kindness. Strings, strings, strings. But I had no other plan in the world, and I had a kid, and a person without options goes where the door is open. So the next day, after I dropped Posey at school, I borrowed Dottie's car again, and I drove out to the address on the placemat. It was a small white house at the edge of town with a porch swing and a garden gone to sleep for the winter, and in the driveway, next to the brown station wagon, sat a second car, a sedan, maybe 10 years old, dark blue, clean as a whistle. He was standing next to it in his gray overcoat, holding a set of keys. "This was Ruth's," he said when I walked up. "She passed almost 4 years back and I haven't been able to sell it. Haven't been able to drive it either. It just sits here." He held the keys out to me. "It's yours if you'll have it. It's paid for. It runs like a dream." I start it up once a month so the battery doesn't die, and that's the only time it's moved since the funeral. I stood there in his driveway and I could not make my hand reach out. I can't, I said. Mr. Calloway, I can't take your wife's car. You can, he said. I've thought about it a long while, longer than just last Sunday. That car was never any good to anybody sitting in this driveway. Ruth would have hated it the waste. She'd have had it in some young mother's hands inside a week and never thought twice. His voice got rough. It would mean something to me knowing it was being used by somebody who needed it, knowing some of her was still out there doing good. You'd be doing me the favor. You understand? You'd be the one helping me. I have thought about that sentence 1,000 times since. You'd be the one helping me. Because the thing he understood, that I was years away from understanding, is that there's no kindness without two people in it. That the person who receives is giving something too. He needed to give that car away as badly as I needed to receive it. He had all that love, with no place to put it down, and I had a hole in my life the exact shape of what he was holding. I took the keys. I cried in his driveway, which I'd sworn I wouldn't do, and he patted my shoulder twice, awkward the way men of his generation do. And then he said, "Now go on, you've got a girl to pick up." I drove Ruth's car home. It smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, and there was a pair of reading glasses still in the console and a church bulletin from 4 years ago in the door pocket, and I left all of it exactly where it was because it felt like trespassing to touch it. That blue sedan got me to work for the next 3 years. I never once made a payment on it. Every time I climbed in, I thought of a woman I never met who couldn't keep her hands in her pockets. But I'm getting ahead of myself because the car wasn't the end of it. In a lot of ways, it was the start. After that, things between Mr. Calloway and me changed. He was still my Sunday regular, 2 coffees, 2 slices of pie, but I stopped being just the waitress who brought them. I started sitting with him for a few minutes when the diner was slow. He told me about Ruth, how they met at a dance hall in 1961, how she beat him at gin rummy for 50 years and crowed about it every time, how she planted tulips every fall that she said she planted for the version of herself who'd see them in spring. I started bringing Posy on the Sundays I had her, and Mr. Calloway, who'd never had a child in his life, took to her like he'd been waiting his whole life for the job. He taught her gin rummy at the back booth. He'd let her win and then act outraged about it, exactly the way he described Ruth doing to him. He brought her a stuffed rabbit one Sunday, said he'd seen it in a shop window and thought of her, and Posy named it Mr. Mite, Calloway after him, and carried that rabbit around until it was gray and one ear was hanging by a thread. He came to her school's winter concert sitting in the folding chairs in his gray overcoat, and when she found him in the crowd afterward, she ran at him so hard she nearly knocked him over. And the look on his face, I don't have the words for the look on his face. I don't have the words for the look on his face. Like a man who'd been cold a very long time, finally standing close to a fire. He had a son, it turned out. I learned this slowly, the way you learn the hard things, in pieces over many Sundays. A son named Gordon who lived out in Arizona, who he hadn't spoken to in 11 years. There'd been a falling out after Ruth's funeral, the kind of fight grief makes worse. Words said that couldn't get unsaid, and then the silence that hardens around a family like concrete the longer nobody breaks it. Mr. Calloway never told me exactly what the fight was about. I think by the end even he wasn't sure. He just knew it had been 11 years and a phone that didn't ring, and that every year that went by made it harder to imagine picking up the receiver himself. Pride's a funny thing, he told me once. It'll keep you warm for about an hour and cost you the rest of your life. I want to tell you I had the wisdom to say something profound. I didn't. But I held on to that, the way you hold on to the things people give you when they don't know they're giving them. The 3rd winter I knew him, Mr. Calloway didn't come in one Sunday. It was the first Sunday he'd missed in all the time I'd known him, and I felt the wrongness of it in my stomach all morning. I kept looking up at the door at 9:15, at 9:30, at 10. The back booth sat empty. I asked Gail and she didn't know anything. By noon I couldn't stand it. I drove Ruth's car out to the little white house at the edge of town, and the brown station wagon was in the driveway, but no lights were on, and when I knocked nobody came. I knocked harder. I called his name, and then through the window I saw him on the kitchen floor. I'm not going to walk you through every minute of that afternoon, because some of it I still can't look at straight on. I broke a pane of the back door with a flower pot and I got to him, and he was breathing, but he wasn't all the way there. his words coming out slurred and slow. I called 911 and I held his hand and I talked to him the whole time, told him about anything, told him Posey's rabbit had lost its ear, told him the tulips would come up soon, told him to hold on. The ambulance came. They said the word stroke in the careful way medical people say the worst words, and they let me ride along because I told them I was family, and in every way that counted by then, I was. He spent 11 days in the hospital. I went every day after my shifts. Posey made him cards, dozens of them, taped them up all over the wall of his room until the nurses started complaining there was no space left. He couldn't talk well at first. The stroke had taken the right side of his words, but his eyes would find us the second we walked in, and his good hand would lift off the blanket toward Posey, and that was a whole conversation. On the 4th day, I did the thing I'd been turning over since the ambulance. I went through his wallet, I had it, he'd asked me to hold his things, and I found an old address book, the leather kind, soft from years of pockets, and I looked under C until I found a number for a Gordon Calloway in Arizona. I sat in the hospital parking garage for 45 minutes before I made the call, because it wasn't mine to make. Because I might be reaching into a wound that had every right to stay closed. Because pride, like the man said, is a funny thing. And maybe it ran in the family, and maybe I'd just get hung up on. But I kept hearing him say it cost you the rest of your life, and I kept thinking about a phone that hadn't rung in 11 years. And I thought about how short the rest of a life can be, and I dialed. A man answered, wary the way you are when an unknown number calls. My name is Della, I said. You don't know me. I'm a friend of your father's, Frank Calloway. I heard him go still on the other end. He's in the hospital. He had a stroke. He's stable, the doctors say, but it's serious, and I thought you'd want to know. I thought somebody should tell you. The silence went on so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Gordon Calloway said in a voice that had gone thick, how bad? Bad enough that you should come, I said. If there was ever going to be a time, this is it. He was quiet again. Then, did he ask you to call me? And here is the thing I had to decide in a half a second, the thing I've thought about since. I could have lied. It would have been an easier door to walk through for both of them, but I'd had enough of the lies that grease the world's gears, the little ones we tell to spare people the truth that would actually free them. No, I said. He didn't ask me. He doesn't know I'm calling. He spent 11 years too proud and too scared to call you, same as I'm guessing you spent 11 years too proud and too scared to call him. And I think you've both been wrong, and I think you're running out of time to keep being wrong. So I'm calling. Because somebody had to be the one to pick up the phone, and it turned out to be me. Gordon Calloway flew in 2 days later. I was in the room when he walked in. I'd been reading to Mr. Calloway from the paperback he never read, and the door opened and a man in his 50s stood there, gray at the temples, holding his hat in both hands like a boy. He looked so much like a younger version of the man in the bed that my breath caught. Mr. Calloway turned his head. His face, I'd seen that face full of grief and full of joy by then. I thought I'd seen all of it. I hadn't seen this. His mouth worked, trying to make the word. His stroke had stolen, and the only thing that came out, slow and broken and unmistakable, was son. I left them alone. I took Posey's hand and walked out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me. And I stood there with my back against the wall and listened to two men who'd wasted 11 years cry into each other's shoulders. And I will tell you that is a sound I'll hear on my deathbed and be glad of. Mr. Calloway lived another 4 years. The stroke took some of his strength and most of his old station wagon. He couldn't drive anymore, and Gordon, who moved back to Marlow within the month, took to driving him places instead. They came to the Bluebird together every Sunday after that. 2 old griefs, healing in the same booth. I bring 3 coffees now. 1 for Frank, 1 for Gordon, and 1 set across the empty space for Ruth. Cream, no sugar, because some habits are too precious to give up, and because Gordon, when he understood what that 3rd cup meant, had to put his face in his hands for a minute before he could speak. Those were good years. I don't want to dress them up. Frank got slower, and there were hospital scares, and the morning came, the way it always comes, when Gordon called me before my shift, and I knew from the first word what he was going to say. Frank Calloway passed in his sleep on a Sunday of all the days, the 17th of April, with the tulips Ruth planted just coming up outside his window. He left me Ruth's car for good, in writing, though I'd thought of it as mine for years by then. And he left me something else in an envelope Gordon handed me at the funeral, my name on the front and Frank's shaky post-stroke hand. I won't tell you everything that within the letter because some of it belongs only to me. But I'll tell you the part I think he'd want you to hear. He wrote that for 11 years he'd carried around all that love for his son with no place to put it down, and that the day I called Arizona without asking, I'd given him back the one thing he thought he'd lost for good. He wrote that I'd thought I was the one being helped, all those Sundays, the car, the money under the cup, but that I'd had it backward the whole time, that a lonely old man had needed someone to be kind to as badly as he'd ever needed anything, and that Posey and I had been the answer to a prayer he'd been too proud to say out loud. He wrote, "You let an old man love you and your girl when he had nobody left to love. You'll never know what that was worth." And then, at the bottom, the last line, "Tell Posey her Uncle Frank says to keep winning at gin. We both know she earns it." I read that letter standing in a funeral home in my one good dress with my daughter's hand in mine, and I understood at last the thing he'd been trying to teach me since the first $100 bill. That kindness isn't a transaction with a giver and a taker. That it's a circle and you can't always tell which end you're standing on, and it doesn't matter because the circle is the whole point. He thought he was saving me. I thought I was saving him. The truth is, we were both drowning in our different ways, and we reached for each other and neither one of us could have named who pulled who out. Gordon and I are still close. He's the closest thing Posey has to a grandfather, and he steps into it gladly. She's 11 now. She still has the rabbit, what's left of it, in a place of honor on her shelf. Every April, on the 17th, the three of us go out to the cemetery where Frank and Ruth are buried side by side, and we leave 2 coffees on the headstone. Cream no sugar for her. And we sit in the grass and we tell stories about a man who couldn't watch somebody drowning and keep his hands in his pockets. I drive a different car now. I finally retired Ruth's old sedan 2 winters ago, 240,000 miles on it, and I cried doing it, the same as I cried the day I got it, but I didn't sell it for scrap. I gave it away. There's a young woman at the Bluebird now, started last spring, a single mother same as I was, with a little boy and a car that's always one repair from the junkyard and a face that does math in the cereal aisle. I know that face. I wore it for years. I left the keys on her tray one Sunday with the title signed over, and when she came running out into the parking lot after me, sure I'd made a mistake, I turned around slow, the way you do when you finally understand something, and I told her what an old man once told me. "You'd be the one helping me," I said. "You understand? Some love's got no place to put itself down. You'd be doing me the favor." She took the keys. She cried. Right there in the lot, the same as I had, and I drove home with the windows down and the spring coming on, and I swear to you I could feel them both in the car with me, Frank and Ruth. All that love still out there in the world, still going around, still looking for the next set of hands. For a long time I thought the lesson of those Sundays was about luck, that I'd just happened to wait on the right lonely old man at the right desperate moment. But the older I get, the more I see it wasn't luck at all. It was a chain, link by link, and every link was a choice somebody made. Frank chose to keep coming to that back booth after Ruth died, when it would have been easier to stay home and disappear into his grief. I chose to set down that second coffee the way she liked it, cream no sugar, instead of treating him like just another check. Neither one of those was a big, heroic thing. They were small, almost invisible. But that's how it works, I think. The big rescues are built out of tiny decencies nobody's watching you make. The car in his driveway, the love that came back around. None of it would have existed if either of us had kept our hands in our pockets even one Sunday. What I learned from Frank, more than anything, is that being a good person isn't a feeling you have. It's a thing you do when it's inconvenient. When I found that address book in his wallet and sat in the parking garage for 45 minutes, every easy part of me wanted to put it away and mind my own business. Calling Gordon wasn't mine to do, but I'd watched pride cost that man 11 years with his only son, and I understood that staying quiet would have been the comfortable choice and the wrong one. Knowing the difference between those two and having the nerve to act on it, even when your hands are shaking, that's the whole game. And I'll tell you the part nobody warns you about. Doing the right thing didn't make me feel brave. It made me feel sick and scared the entire time. The night before I broke that door pane to get to him on the kitchen floor. The morning I dialed Arizona. The day I signed Ruth's car over to a stranger at the Bluebird. Every one of those. My stomach was in knots. The strength wasn't in feeling no fear. It was in moving anyway. One more time, when quitting was right there on the table. Posey is 11 now, and she watched all of it. She watched me struggle and choose and struggle again. And what I hope stuck to her isn't the happy ending. It's the middle. The ugly part. The showing up when it would have been easier to fold. Because the world will hand her plenty of moments to put her hands in her pockets and walk away clean. I want her to be the kind who can't. Frank taught me that some love has no place to put itself down until you give it away on purpose, so I keep giving it away. And every single time, I swear I can feel that old man and his wife somewhere in the back seat smiling.